Welcome to Sustainable Intelligence, where we discuss all things ESG and sustainability for the private markets, brought to you by Novata. I'm Ella Williamson, and I'm thrilled to be your host. Joining us today is Mark Fischel, Head of Carbon at Novata, who formerly started his own business in the world of carbon accounting. Together, we'll unpack the intricacies of science-based targets. So let's jump in. First off, what's the deal with setting a science-based target? What's the reasoning behind it?
Great, thank you. So this all comes back to the Paris Agreements back in 2015, where all of the countries in the world agreed together that we all wanted to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees versus pre-industrial levels, and ideally 1.5 degrees. The reason for that is well known by all. By limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, we can avoid the worst effects of floods, fires, coral bleaching, etc. All of these will be a lot worse if we reach 2 or exceed 2 degrees than keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees. So we need to get our act together and reduce emissions as quickly as we can, because greenhouse gases can stay around in the environment for well over 100 years. So the science-based targets really takes the spirit of Paris and translates that into business and commercial language. As a company, what do I need to do to ensure that I am in alignment with the Paris Agreement of 2015? And that essentially is what setting a science-based target in line with the Science-Based Target Initiative actually helps you to do, is to understand as a business what you need to do. And ultimately, to simplify it comes down to reducing your emissions by 50% by 2030, and then virtually by 100% by your net zero target date, probably 2050.
Great. So it sounds like it's really about fulfilling corporate social responsibility. So moving on slightly, what exactly is a science-based target, and what's the lowdown on SBTi? Has there been any exciting news or industry developments recently?
Yes, so the SBTi stands for the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is essentially the not-for-profit body that organises this science-based target setting exercise by businesses. Now, the SBTi has seen incredible growth over the last several years. Over 4,000 businesses are now listed as having set a science-based target, including some of the world's biggest and also some small companies. And the SBT, that means that the Science-Based Targets Initiative has huge influence over the corporate sustainability landscape. As just one example of that, their position on the usability of carbon credits as part of that science-based target has actually had an enormous impact on the growth of that industry as a whole. So it's a hugely important institution, and it has been in the news recently. In fact, only last week, so we're in March 2024 for anyone listening in the future, the science-based targets had to remove hundreds of businesses from their validated list of companies having set targets. And the reason for that is that those companies that set a science-based target in the rush to set these targets a few years ago have realised a few years on that actually there's a lot of challenges and difficulties associated with actually achieving and obtaining that target. And in particular, the most important reason that they cited, those companies, when pulling out, was that they're really struggling to engage their suppliers and get their suppliers to help them hit their science-based target.
Fascinating. Yeah, I think that part about scope 3 emissions and actually engaging your suppliers to report on those is the piece that people tend to be struggling with. So if we shift gears slightly, how do you even go about setting a target, and what's the nitty-gritty of the process?
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, it actually isn't that difficult. The idea is behind setting the targets is without too much lift as a company, you can set a target and show your commitment, and then the hard work starts to actually go off and actually work out, well, how am I going to actually achieve that target? So it isn't that complicated, but in terms of a practical guide, if you're a company of below 250 FTEs, so you're an SME, then there's a streamlined option for you that removes some of the stages. But for companies above 250 FTEs, it comes down to 5 stages. Stage 1, commit. So you submit a letter where you set out your intent to set a science-based target, committing to set a commitment, if you like. Then stage 2 is develop. So you use all of the SBTi's documents and criteria to work out what your target needs to be, depending on what industry you're in. And then stage 3, you submit. So you send this to the SBTi and you go through the validation process. Stage 4, you communicate. So once that target's been validated, you can actually announce your target and share it with stakeholders. And then finally, stage 5, disclose. So once you set a target, you have to report on it every single year to the SBT to ensure that you are actually on track to hit that target.
Great. And picking up on the point you made earlier, then the 6th part of that is that continual improvement of your strategy.
Right.
So what I'd love to know about is, what are those real hurdles and challenges when it comes to setting those targets?
You don't necessarily have to know every single piece around how you're actually going to decarbonise, especially if some of that relies on factors outside of your control, whether that's your suppliers or technological advancements. But I think one thing you really do need before you can set the target is you need to have a really good understanding of what your emissions are. So where are you today? In fact, all of the targets are set based on your emissions baseline, so on the emissions measurement that you've actually set out initially. So without having measured a high quality GHG footprint, you really aren't in a good place to set a target against that initial footprint.
Great. So it's all about looking at where you are today and then planning your path for the future of decarbonisation.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. That is a wrap for today's episode. Until next time, let's keep building sustainable intelligence together. Find out more at novata.com.